I've encouraged them to do as little reworking as possible because we have a very delicate balance that we've maintained in the House and the Senate. We both have small majorities. We have a big national debt problem. But I think what's being discounted here is the fact that we are achieving the largest amount of savings in the history of government on planet Earth. I mean, we're going to save over $1.5 trillion in spending. This is going to be deficit reducing at the end of the day. It matters how you do the math, and that's what's important for everybody to remember.
That's the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, defending the big, beautiful bill as GOP senators, as well as Elon Musk, by the way, push back on the current state of wording in that bill. White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett was with me yesterday on this program. Here's what he said about getting the bill to the president's desk by the summertime.
We're looking forward over the next few weeks to working with the president to get the spending cuts through that the Senate can pass, that they can agree about, and that the House can then agree about as well. Because in the end, we have to have a big, beautiful bill pass, and we're 100% confident that we're going to be able to do that. If we stop spending some of the wasteful spending, for example, the grants to chipmunks and so on that you've been reading about, if we stop spending that money, then we can rescind the money at the end of the year. And so we're very, very confident there's going to be a steady stream of spending reductions, big reductions in this bill, but reductions that are more to come, and they're going to be coming every month from the start of July after we do this bill until President Trump leaves office.
Joining me now here at the Reagan National Economic Forum in Simi Valley is Arkansas Congressman French Hill, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. Mr. Chairman, it's great to have you.
Wonderful to be here at the Reagan Center. I got my political start in the first term of Ronald Reagan, working for the Senate Banking Committee. So 40 years later, here we are at the Reagan Library, and I'm chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. It's a surreal moment for me.
You got to pinch yourself on that one, don't you?
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier about Reagan's, free market principles, and that's what I know you and your colleagues are trying to get back to and endure. You mentioned Reagan. Tell me about Reagan, and you mentioned when we were off camera, Reagan and Nixon both used tariffs.
Yeah. Well, look, President Reagan had at his heart giving more power back to the people through lower taxes, through lower regulation. He said there was nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. He wanted to shrink the size of government. But he also recognized America leads in the world. America has the reserve currency. And so when he wanted fair trade, he wanted open markets for American goods and services. He wanted to expand exports and reduce trade barriers. So he used Section 301 of the Trade Act to try to pry open Japanese markets at the time. He used voluntary auto restraints to restrain Japanese auto imports into the U.S. They responded, and ultimately now, 40 years later, they make more Japanese cars in America than anywhere else in the world. When it comes to selling to the American market, they're made here by Americans. And he used the same approach, a limit, essentially a tariff limit on semiconductors from Japan. So he used the authorities of the president to try to open markets. President Nixon, the same. He was the first to declare an emergency, different law.
Interesting.
It's what led IEPA to be passed. He declared an emergency to say that there was a balance of impayments and that the West German at the time and Japanese currencies were overvalued. And so he put an across-the-board 10% tariff at that time to compel them to the negotiating table. It wasn't to raise revenue.
Yeah.
It wasn't, to protect industries per se, but it was used as a weapon to get them to change their trade policy.
Which is what President Trump is trying to do. But you mentioned IEPA. I mean, the international economic emergency that President Trump has used for these tariffs. Yep. The Federal Appeals Court reinstating President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs just a day after the Court of International Trade ruled that he overstepped his executive authority, that authority rests with Congress.
Yep.
You're an elected official.
Yep.
You are a member of Congress. How do you see this? How do you view that?
Well, I do agree that setting tariff policy is a power of Congress on Article 1, and we delegate that to the president, and we have since 1933 under what's called basically trade promotion authority. And when the president uses the IEPA to impose a tariff, it's tended to be temporary and to achieve a certain result. And it requires congressional approval to do that. In other words, the Congress could vote to say, well, there's not an emergency, for example. So that back and forth between Congress and the executive branch is critical. And the main thing to know is that it is Congress delegating to the president to support a tariff policy, either on an emergency basis or through Trade Promotion Authority, which is why I've argued Congress should renew Trade Promotion Authority that Joe Biden let expire. Joe Biden had a terrible record on trade. He accomplished nothing in 4 years. He made it worse. And I think that would allow President Trump to turn the UK deal into a trade arrangement, not just a business arrangement, but actually a binding trade treaty. And I hope we could have a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom, as an example.
That's very smart analysis. I want to get back to the big, beautiful bill and what's going on in the Senate right now. You've got some of your colleagues in the Senate saying, look, why don't we just do two bills? We had Ron Johnson on yesterday. He said, let's wait to vote on the no tax on tips and no tax on Social Security, the second bill, second half of the year.
Yeah.
Hasn't that horse left the station in the House?
The train is out of the station, the horse is out of the barn, the cow's out of the corral, all that. I think that it's such a careful balance, as Speaker Johnson just outlined, that we have narrow majorities in both the House and Senate, and combining spending cuts, spending enhancements or increases for President Trump's priorities on the border, to secure the border, to secure our national security, combined with preventing American families and businesses from a huge tax cut. That's what brought the coalition together to pass it at the House, and why I believe the senators can add value, both on spending cuts and perhaps on the revenue side. I think we need one big, beautiful bill, and I think that's the way to hold that coalition together.
And I agree with the way you said it. It's not cutting taxes. It's stopping an enormous tax increase, which is amazing to me that your colleagues on the left, the Democrats, will not even participate in this at all.
Right. Apparently, they don't want to vote for border security. They don't want to vote for building submarines to counter China in the Pacific. They don't want to block a big tax increase on our small businesses and our families. I don't get it. They just keep talking about that it's a bill to benefit the rich. And I think President Trump proved that was just a false narrative in the 2017 tax cut when he and Paul Ryan came together to cut taxes for the American people. We had more revenue. We had a decades-high increase in revenue, and the benefits were spread across the entire economy. A family in Arkansas, 9 out of 10 families instead of 7 out of 10, so a big increase, could use the standard deduction, simpler tax filing season at a lower rate across the board.
All right, so let me push back and ask you about what some of your other colleagues are looking at as being a generational opportunity to cut into the $37 trillion in debt that we face. The fact that the CBO current projection is possibly a rosy scenario of $22 trillion 10-year deficit. Wow. $2.2 trillion a year. Total debt going from $37 trillion to $59 trillion by 2035. How do you cut that down?
First of all, you have to preserve economic growth. Growth is the secret to the American engine. Everybody wants to be in the U.S. I know with all this controversy and uncertainty, everyone in the world wants to invest in the U.S. So economic growth is number one. That's built into our tax policy. We've cut $1.5 trillion in mandatory spending, and then the fiscal 26 is where these DOGE ideas will come in. DOGE is not cutting mandatory spending. DOGE was focused on discretionary spending. And I think you'll see some cuts there reflected in 2026 fiscal spending. But I'm concerned about the deficit period. The biggest concern that I have about the future of the dollar, the future of the American leadership in the world, is that we don't get control of this unsustainable budget deficit unleashed by the pandemic and unleashed by Joe Biden's $6 trillion in new spending. This is just one step to move back.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. The Securities and Exchange Commission, due to the work of early retirements in just the first 5 months of the Trump administration, we're back to fiscal 19, fiscal 20 personnel levels. And we're going to reform the contracts there. We're going to get spending down. And if every agency in government took that attitude, let's go back.
That's good.
That's the spirit of DOGE.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to work on that in this spending plan.
We're going to talk with Commissioner Mark Uyeda coming up from the Securities and Exchange Commission. But I got to ask you about digital assets. You introduced, of course, the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act yesterday, establishing a regulatory framework for U.S. digital assets. And you're also working on the stablecoin legislation. So I want to get your take on what the framework should look like. What is the role of the Securities and Exchange Commission, by the way, there? And how does this change things?
Well, we believe first that the U.S. needs a dollar-backed stablecoin as a payment mechanism. We want to have high standards. We want to lead the world in that. And both Bill Hagerty, my friend in the Senate, has an excellent bill there. We have a bill we've marked up in the House. So we're going to have this year a dollar-backed stablecoin bill for President Trump to sign into law.
That's fantastic.
And then, there's no place to use it. To make it the most effective, you need a market framework. What's a commodity? What's a security? How do people custody digital assets? What digital assets are regulated and which ones are not? And that's what this market framework bill that we introduced yesterday, it's a bipartisan bill written by members of the House Agriculture Committee because they oversee commodities and the House Financial Services Committee because we oversee securities. And we think we've built on our success back in 2023, where 71 Democrats supported market structure reforms on the House floor. So we're going to repeat that. We hope to get that to the president soon.
That is amazing. Congressman, you're doing such important work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Great to be with you, Maria.
French Hill here.